Senate will please come to order. Today's devotional exercises will be conducted by Reverend Joan Javier Duval of the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I will begin this devotional time by sharing some words for meditation and reflection by Holly Mueller, and then inviting us into a few moments of silence. This is called maybes. Maybes are not comforting. They are not neat. They are sand spilled into an oyster, rainstorms that were not forecast. We are not made for maybes. We are of the physical world, of the ground so sure beneath us, of the breeze rustling our clothes, of the binary nature of day and night. But the maybes were not made for us either, and so we wrestle with them, often late into the night, hoping we can beat them into submission with the right plan and the backup plan and flowchart. We try to fit them into backpacks with an umbrella and a map so we won't have to let go of our route or our agenda or our traveling companion. The maybes get out in the murky in-between of dusk, in the obscured view beyond the next hill, raising doubt that we've picked the right direction. It's okay. Let them out. The maybes and the in-betweens and the almosts. Let them walk with you. Befriend them if you can. And if you can't, that's okay too. They will slip rocks in your shoes and rip up your map. But you'll learn to read the stars and trust your feet if you let them be your guide. I invite us into a few moments of silence. As you move into your work today of seeking clarity in the murkiness, of reaching for yes or no amid the maybes, may you offer yourself and those around you compassion, and may wisdom arise from your hearts and your minds in the work that you share together. Blessed be and amen.
Please rise for a pledge of allegiance if you are able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any announcements? Senator from Chittenden Central. Senator from Chittenden Central, are there announcements?
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have an announcement. As senators may know, we have a joint session today at 1 o'clock, and we'll be in the chamber just a little in advance of that. I did want to let you know that we've talked about having a hard stop today at noon in order to allow us to get lunch and caucus. So should we go from now until noon, we'll hard stop at noon, and then pick up tomorrow with where we leave off. The hope is to clear most of the calendar that we have in front of us, but as you can see, we have a lot of second readings and a lot of discussion to get done. So that's the plan, and then we would try to do a similar thing in the next few days as we work our way down the calendar. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, we have our JRS 21, our weekend adjournment. Please listen to the reading of the resolution.
JRS 21, Joint Resolution Relating to Weekend Adjournment. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that when the two houses adjourn on Friday, March 31, 2023, the be to meet again no later than Tuesday, April 4, 2023.
Now you've heard the reading of the resolution. The question is, shall the Senate adopt the resolution? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have adopted JRS 21. I do want to point out, technically, I did not hear the individuals that are on the screen, and that doesn't matter for this particular vote, but I want to make sure the mics are working in future votes if there are different wishes to be heard. We have a number of House bills for reference today. The first being H-178. It was introduced by Representative Emmons of Springfield. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-178, an act relating to commissioning Department of Corrections personnel as notaries public.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. We have H-230. H-230 was introduced by Representative Black and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-230, an act relating to implementing mechanisms to reduce suicide.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We have H-288 introduced by Representative Nickel of Ludlow. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-288, an act relating to liability for the sale of alcoholic beverages.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We have H-473 introduced by the Committee on Health Care. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-473, an act relating to radiologist assistance.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Health and Welfare. We have H-476 introduced by the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-476, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. That brings us to the orders of the day. My understanding is we are passing over S-89 and up for S-138. S-138 was read the first time and placed on the notice for calendar as it was introduced by the Committee on Education. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-138, an act relating to school safety.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and now for the report from the Committee on Education, the Senator from Windham, Senator Hashim.
Mr. President, as I was preparing my report on this bill over the weekend, there was a certain moment that struck me. I was chatting with my partner about the bill and the different policies, and we got into the topic of floor plans and layouts in different schools in our county. And she asked me the very reasonable question, which was, Nader, how do you know so much about the floor plans of different schools that aren't even in our town? And I realized it's because of the number of times that I regularly had to do active shooter drills and training with other law enforcement in different schools throughout Windham County. And also the amount of time I spent familiarizing myself with door and window locations at these schools so that I'd be prepared if an emergency scenario unfolded and I was the first on the scene. And I just share this brief story to illustrate how pervasive violence is in our country, that it requires and justifies such regular and dedicated training by first responders in order to have an adequate response to these situations. Now, Section 1 of S-138, the bill is being handed out. You'll be getting paper copies of it. There's also an amendment located on page 723 of today's calendar, which I will get to. And Section 1 affects Title 16 VSA 1481 regarding fire and emergency preparedness drills. This section strikes the current language in 1481A, which previously required principals or heads of school to drill students according to the school's emergency preparedness plan. The changes our committee made involve the following provisions. Subsection A requires that each public school adopt a policy mandating each school to conduct options-based response drills at each school site in the fall and spring of each school year, in accordance with guidance issued by the Vermont School Safety Center jointly with the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team. For those of you wondering, options-based response drills are also commonly known as run, hide, or fight. According to a 2018 study performed by the Department of Criminal Justice at Xavier University, there were a number of benefits that arose from utilizing options-based responses. Specifically, in a classroom setting, the average number of participants shot decreased roughly by 50% versus traditional lockdown drills. In large open areas such as the library or hallway, the use of options-based responses resulted in a 58% drop of those shot when compared to using traditional lockdown responses. Subsection B requires that the guidance issued by the Vermont School Safety Center jointly with the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team include trauma-informed best practices for implementing options-based response drills. Subsection C is existing language that remains unchanged. Subsection D requires that superintendents report completion of biannual drills to the Agency of Education. And I know there might be some questions about the change in the frequency of drills. That language did confuse me, so it might confuse other folks. And I'll just say that I received some clarity over the weekend from the Department of Public Safety. Although we see that there's a strike of the current language contained in 16 VSA 1481B, which required drills to be held at least once a month during the school year, those drills will still be conducted. What the language causes is that fire drills will still be performed once a month, which is in accordance with the guidance issued by the Vermont School Safety Center. And this can be seen in subsection A. Additionally, the head of each school, whether it's a private or public school, must report completion of the biannual drills to the Agency of Education. There's also a requirement to keep a log of all the drills performed, which may be reviewed by the Vermont School Safety Center and the Agency of Education in order to ensure compliance and to identify any future training needs. Section 2 affects Title 16 VSA 1480, which involves emergency operations plans. Subsection A requires supervisory unions and school districts to adopt and maintain an all-hazards emergency option plan for each school site that is at least as comprehensive as the template maintained by the Vermont School Safety Center, and to review and annually update the plan in collaboration with local emergency first responders and emergency management officials. Section B requires that, subsection B requires that independent schools to adopt and maintain an all-hazards emergency options plan consistent with what is required of public schools. Subsection C requires the Vermont School Safety Center to maintain an emergency operations plan template. For those wondering what the template is, it is available online in a number of different files, each of which contains guidance for what to do in different scenarios ranging from an active shooter, hazmat responses, hazardous weather, and many other dangerous scenarios. Section 3 affects Title 16 VSA 1484, which involves access control and the visitor management policy. This section proposes to add a new section of 1484, which requires in subsection A that supervisory unions and districts adopt an access control and visitor management policy that, at a minimum, requires all school sites and district offices lock their exterior doors during the school day, and requires all visitors to sign in at a centralized location prior to gaining full access to the school or office. Subsection B allows a school to recognize a need to leave a specific structure unlocked as needed for agricultural or recreational purposes, and to document that justification for such a need in their visitor policy. And this is where the amendment comes into play. The amendment was made to include the language as reasonably practical and directly related to the school mission or curriculum. This came after learning from schools who have unique curriculum and outdoor learning plans that locking all their doors to the dozen or so structures on their campus would be infeasible. The committee vote for the amendment was 4-0-1. We had one member who wasn't able to make it in that day. And going back to the underlying bill, the last provision of this section is that independent schools will also have to adopt an access control and visitor management policy consistent with what is required for public schools. Section 4 affects Title 16 VSA 1485 and involves behavioral threat assessment teams. Subsection A requires that each supervisory union or district or independent school that utilizes a threat assessment team to ensure members of the team receive training at least annually in best practices of conducting behavioral threat assessments, as well as bias training. Subsection D prohibits behavioral threat assessments from being used for a punitive or disciplinary purpose. Subsection C is for students on an individual education program, an IEP, and it prohibits the use of the threat assessment in place of the manifestation determination review process that is required under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the State Board of Education rules for students who are not eligible for special education services, but who are or may be qualified for special education services under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It also prohibits the use of a behavioral threat assessment in place of the manifestation determination review process that is required under State Board of Education rules. Subsection D requires an annual report to the Agency of Education with data related to completion of and outcomes of all behavioral threat assessments and manifestation determination reviews, including the names of the behavioral threat assessment team, the number of assessment and reviews conducted in the preceding year, a description of the behavior, the age, grade, race, gender, disability status, and eligibility for free or reduced price meals of student requiring assessment or review, and the results of each assessment or review. And lastly, the number of students subjected to more than one assessment or review. Section 5 are the effective dates. And lastly, I just want to close by saying this bill was a joint effort between the committee and the Agency of Education, which presented its original proposals to us. Through extensive deliberation, the committee developed the version that you see in front of you today. And we heard from the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, the Director of the Violence Prevention Task Force, School Safety Grants Program Manager of the Vermont Emergency Management, the Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, the President of the Vermont National Education Association, the Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association, the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Secretary of the Agency of Education, the Executive Director of Threat Management from the business called ONTIC, the Principal of the Williston Central School, the Director of Policy, Education and Outreach from the Vermont Human Rights Commission, the Advocacy Director of the ACLU of Vermont, Staff Attorney for Government Relations from Vermont Legal Aid, and Legislative Counsel. The committee vote was 3-2-0, and I ask for the Senate support.
My understanding is there's an amendment to be offered as well. Is that correct, Senator from Windham?
Yes, my apologies. I should have asked or mentioned that I'd be speaking to the underlying bill and the amendment at the same time.
The report of the bill is appropriate, and now for the amendment as offered on page 723 of today's calendar, the senator from Windham. Got it. The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the senator from Windham? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the bill as offered by the senator from Windham. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know we have a long morning, so I won't belabor this, but I didn't want this bill to pass without a mention of what the toll this takes on our kids. As a mother of 3 kids who've grown up since they were kindergartners with multiple drills for safety and for active shooters or other dangers in our school district, I think it's really important that we pause to remember how much of a toll this takes on our kids. And just over the weekend or yesterday, I believe, there was another school shooting in Tennessee in which 3 9-year-olds and 3 teachers were killed. And it's a tragedy that faces our country more than any other country in the world. And for kids to have to grow up in this world and our country and our state and have to bear the burden of the problems that we as adults have caused is tragic. And I thank the Senate Education Committee for taking this up and for what must have been a difficult conversation at times. I do want to note that none of the witnesses were kids, and so the kids didn't get a chance to talk about the toll that this has taken on them. So I just wanted to stand up and voice what I know is incredibly stressful and frightening for kids who've grown up in this atmosphere. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of S-138. We now are passing over S-91 and have up for consideration S-33. S-33 is found in today's calendar on page 730. The question of, are there any amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading of the bill.
S-33, an act relating to miscellaneous judiciary procedures.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill. The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have passed S-33. We now have S-133. It's a committee bill for second reading, so please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-133, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to education law.
Now, you've heard the second reading of the bill. It can be found on today's calendar on page 730. And for the report of the Committee on Education, the Senator from Bennington County, Senator Campion.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as the chair of Senate Ed, I do want to just thank Senator Hashim for a great report and Senator Hardy for her comments. It was a challenging conversation and one that I fear will continue. This is a rather pared down miscellaneous education bill before us. There were sections on driver's education and career technical centers that senators can expect to see later this session when we take up the House miscellaneous education bill. So let me bring you through these four sections. The first two sections are aimed to give us a better look at what's happening in our schools. The goal of section one is to start a process to determine potential inequities in academic offerings and to help us better understand what discrepancies may exist. Many of us, those of us who were in the building several years ago, know the story that was, excuse me, of the student that was turned down for admission from the University of Vermont when he applied and his school only offered 2 years of math and the university requires 3. At that time, President Sullivan, of course, when it was brought to his attention, intervened and the student was admitted. But since that time, I think for many of us, we have been wondering what kinds of discrepancies exist out there around lack of foreign languages, AP offerings, remedial classes. And your Committee on Education is interested in this info with the possibility of exploring various ways to address the needs, particularly in our less resourced district. We want to do our best to make certain that our students have the depth and breadth of offerings that other schools have, not only in Vermont, but throughout the United States. And this is a small step down this path. As you'll hear from the Appropriations Committee, they understandably, because finances are attached, have amended this section and will continue to fine-tune it a little bit in committee and work with the agency as we move forward and the budget is taken up. Section 2 is another outstanding question having to do with proficiency-based learning. Senators may recall that Vermont officially adopted proficiency-based learning graduation requirements in 2013. In December of that year, the State Board of Education approved new education standards that shifted the focus from input to outcomes. As the Agency of Education explains that from a focus on courses and Carnegie units and seat time to a real focus on mastery and content. The change stems from a state law also adopted in 2013 that requires schools to develop personalized learning plans for students and to allow students to learn outside the classroom, including online. at a workplace, in a career technical center, or in college. And that law, Act 77, is called the Flexible Pathways Initiative. And your Committee on Education simply wants to have a check-in on personalized learning plans. We're looking to assess how they're working, if they're working, if they're an effective way to ensure that Vermont students attain rigorous standards and high quality programs, or whether or not there are types of instruction and assessment that would better serve Vermont students. And some of you I know have heard from constituents who have questions about proficiency learning. We heard from a number of individuals, teachers, even a student, and I've heard a lot of anecdotal information that this seems like a good time to check in and assess how things are going. Section 3, post-secondary school marketing. Your Committee on Education believes we have to continue and celebrate and promote our institutions of higher education. We recognize, as will be indicated by the Committee on Appropriations, that this will be discussed in greater detail as the budget makes its way through the process, and I'm sure we will work closely with your Committee on Economic Development on this even further. But we all know that Vermont offers a range of higher education options, and we know that many students that come to Vermont stay in Vermont. If you simply look around this room, there is a very high sampling of senators who came to Vermont for higher education, or perhaps came to Vermont to work in higher education. So this takes a step forward by providing them with some additional resources to help them. They really are up against it. You look at institutions, particularly in New Hampshire, the amount of money that is there for marketing to get people to New Hampshire to try its institutions. It's a challenge, and we thought we would work and recognize this step. Section 4 returns us to the topic of libraries. Senators will recall that this study was initiated by Senator Hardy prior to our COVID dismissal and when we were all working from Zoom at home, and it didn't get taken up. Then last year, Senate Education Committee did take it up. And this is basically, a couple things are happening here. You'll see an amendment that gives the library study some more additional time to actually complete the study at their request. And then we also added recommendations for them for legislative action regarding public safety and protection on library property. This was something that was brought to us by the senator from Wyndham, who had spoken to constituents around library safety. And so we asked them to consider this as they are working on the report. Those are the 4 sections. We heard from Sue Siglowski, Vermont School Boards Association, Jay Nichols, Vermont Principals Association, Jeff Bannon, the National Education Association, Joe Bark, National Drivers Ed and Traffic Safety Education, Ted Fisher, Agency of Education, Catherine Del Neo, State Librarian, Barbara Brody, Drivers Ed, Traffic Safety, and our Ledge Counsel and Hayden Ross who commented as a student of Spalding, and he is our committee assistant. Senators, the vote was 5-0-0, and we hope that the Senate will support the Committee on Education. And with that, I wonder if this is an appropriate time to offer the amendment.
Actually, Senator, we will first hear the Committee of Appropriations report. Now for the report of the Committee on Appropriations on S-133, the senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Appropriations did take up this bill, and as is our habit, we removed the sections that carried with them substantial appropriations. So on page 730, senators will see that amendment, deleting sections 1 and section 3. That's the curriculum audit and the post-secondary school marketing campaign. The discussion about the school marketing campaign was based solely on the money. The curriculum audit, there was a little bit of lingering confusion about what was at issue there or how it was to be conducted. So I was glad to hear my colleague from Bennington talk about further discussion in the committee, which I can then bring back to appropriations. And at the end, when we're working out requests for the big bill, these will come up with all of the others that have been moved out of bills and onto the wall. So our vote on that was 601, and we would appreciate the Senate's support.
So the question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. Senator from Bennington, would you care to offer your amendment?
Yes, I believe the Senate Secretary has the amendment. I referenced this in my report, and this is giving the Study Committee on Libraries some extra time. We heard from them that they have been meeting and talking about a wide range of issues related to libraries. For senators who were not here when we actually looked at this study, this is, in short, the health of our libraries. What can we be doing to support our libraries? We understand libraries are important to our communities, to students, access to internet, all sorts of things. And so what they asked for was some additional time, and as you'll see, we have given them until December 20th, 2023, so short an extra month, give senators an opportunity to possibly review their work and present legislation. And then, as you'll see, we then dissolve the committee on January 20th, 24. So, a couple of date changes. Thank you, Mr. President.
So the question is, shall the S-133 as amended be further amended as offered by the Senator from Bennington? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have further amended the bill as offered by the Senator from Bennington. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S-133. We now have up for consideration S-137. S-137 is a committee bill which has been read the first time, and please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-137, an act relating to energy efficiency modernization.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and for the report from the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, the Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a committee bill. Copies are going to be distributed to senators. S-137 is an act relating to energy efficiency modernization. Sometimes people refer to the states as the laboratories of democracy, and this is a research and development program for that laboratory. We have a pilot that is currently running. It's the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act, and this proposes to extend that pilot by 3 years. The point of the current program is to help us better understand the opportunities we have to make progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal and transportation sectors. As senators are aware, we don't have, at this point in time, a comprehensive program to address greenhouse gas emissions in either of those two sectors, and they total 75% of emissions. So we are in the process of developing those bills, but meanwhile, we wanted to make sure that we had real-world experience so that once we had a program to stand up, we'd be able to capitalize on experience in implementing. So we've been doing that for the last 2+ years through the provisions under the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act. This proposes to extend that program for another 3 years through 2026. And the reason for that is that, for instance, even if our Affordable Heat Act were to be implemented, it would be taking effect till 2026, and there's an ample opportunity to learn and develop our programs so that, should that come into effect, we'll be all the more experienced and wiser and ready to act in a cost-effective way. So the bill, in essence, extends the deadline, the sunset on the current pilot that's in operation. And it also adds one new provision that allows for an additional area of work under it. So turning to the bill itself, in section 1, bottom of page 1, you'll see the dates move forward in 24 to 26. Page 2, you'll see some adjustments at the top of the page related to the budgeting. Basically, they are operating on a flat budget, but adjusted for inflation. Then the bill, starting on line 14 on page 2, lays out a section of criteria for what kinds of programs, measures, and services are eligible to be delivered under the program. There are 5 criteria, and in the third, we amend that criteria to match current expectations and operations, but just to make it more explicit that these efforts will be complementary and not replace or be in competition with existing thermal efficiency programs operated by an entity under 30 VSA 2009 D2A, which is our energy efficiency utility programs, such as Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric, and Vermont Gas System. On page 3, we amend the language again on the criteria for what's being delivered, and it just makes more explicit that these services are to be offered in a fair manner across all utilities and on a statewide basis. The next proposal of change to the current program appears on page 5, section F, beginning on line 3, and it refers to thermal efficiency and process fuel efficiency funding. So these first few lines are a little opaque, notwithstanding 30 VSA 2009. So that's our electrical energy efficiency program. A retailer that is also an entity appointed under 30 VSA 2092. That's if you're both an energy efficiency utility and a utility, we have one such entity in Vermont, that's Burlington Electric. They can, during the years 24 through 26, deliver thermal and transportation measures that reduce fossil fuel use regardless of the pre-existing fuel source of the customer, including measures or programs permissible under the pilot program, with a special emphasis on measures or programs that take a new or innovative approach to reducing fossil fuel use, including modifying or supplementing existing vehicle incentive programs and electrical vehicle supply equipment grant programs to incentivize high consumption fuel users, especially individuals using more than 1,000 gallons of gasoline or diesel annually, and those with low and moderate income. So in short, there are, for low and moderate income folks, we're looking at opportunities to make the transition to cleaner transportation more affordable. Burlington Electric is already developing such programs, and would like the authorization to bring them forward as part of this R&D effort. The other category of individual listed here is those using more than 1,000 gallons. So it turns out that there are a certain small number of super users of fuel, and they account for a very large percentage of emissions. It could be someone who has a very long commute, and so they are liable to they need to purchase a lot of gas over the course of a year. They would be a particularly helpful person to transition to cleaner fuels because of that high consumption. Again, this pilot allows for running a pilot that helps people in those situations move to battery electric vehicles. That's it for changes to what the pilot allows for. In section 2, there's a repeal of the existing sunset in 24, it moves it forward to 27. Section 3 is the effective date. The bill reflects the collaborative effort. There was a lot of discussion around provisions, fairness, criteria, what the program's achieved, and what I'd like to investigate. And so I appreciate we had a lot of help from the following witnesses. We had the Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources Division then from the Department of Public Service. We had a program manager in from Burlington Electric. We had the manager of Vermont Electric Co-op. We had the owner of Meadow Hill Consulting, who consults on fuel matters. We had our counsel, Ms. Czakowski. We had the policy director of the Public Utility Commission. From Efficiency Vermont, we had the director of customer engagement. From Burlington Electric, we had the general manager. And from Vermont Public Interest Research Group, we had the climate and energy program director. The committee vote was 4-1-0, and we ask for your support.
Now for the report from the Committee on Appropriations, the Senator from Orleans, Senator Starr.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Appropriations reviewed the monetary part of S-137 and found that it had no monetary effect on our state budget, and there was using money within its system. Our committee vote was 5-0-2 and would recommend the passage of the S-137.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S-137. I believe that now brings us to S-4. S-4 was read for the first time and reported to the Committee on Judiciary, which recommends that the bill, when amended, ought to pass. It was then reported to the Committee on Appropriations, which also recommends that the bill ought to pass when amended. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S4, an act relating to reducing crimes of violence associated with juveniles and dangerous weapons.
Now for the report of the Committee on Judiciary, the Senator from Bennington, Senator Sears.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll do my best to cover most of the issues that are contained in the bill, but I want to start out with a little comment that this is not an effort to undo the criminal and juvenile justice reforms of the past decade plus. This is an effort to make some adjustments in areas that we think we can all agree on, community violence. I think this bill proposes to make a number of changes to the law in an effort to reduce crimes of violence associated with juveniles and dangerous weapons. The changes involve several different areas of juvenile and weapons laws, and I'll get into those changes as we go through the bill. When first talking about this bill, I said we all have to admit that we can't arrest our way out of this. And that's part of the effort here. I immediately received one of those nice emails we all get. And the best thing, or the only things I can say in the email publicly here is that I'm a liberal socialist scumbag for having introduced such a measure. The effort started last summer. We all saw violence in our communities on a rise. Many of us much more violent than we had ever seen before. That was true in the Bennington area. On August 12th, a meeting was held with a number of folks organized by the chair of the select board in Bennington, as well as, and it was held at the local hospital. We had representatives from DCF, probation and parole, local mental health agency, the hospital, and those involved in treatment for drug addiction, as well as law enforcement, represented by the Bennington Police Department, as well as representatives of the state's attorney's office and others. Mr. President, the agenda was basically identifying missing resources, gaps, and points, pain points, including laws and legislation, services and supports, and coordination among providers. Once I had some idea of what direction we were going to take, I contacted 4 people. One was the junior senator from Bennington, who often thinks of Bennington County as a single-member district. But in this case, I decided to bring him on to the effort. Another was our pro tem, Senator Baruch, who was involved in the initial discussions, and Jay Pershing Johnson, who's the governor's legal counsel. I also contacted Eric Fitzpatrick at Legislative Council, and usually I don't give a lot of credit to Legislative Council, but Eric went over and above, meeting with various local officials, drafting the legislation, and this, you know, it's like a 10-month effort here, and we could not have done it without Eric, and his work is just amazing on this bill and others, but this bill particularly, he put a lot of time and a lot of effort this summer. You know, we've always had gangs, criminal enterprises operating in our area, particularly in southern Vermont, with our closeness to the Berkshires and western Massachusetts. I can remember in the late 70s, early 80s, a gentleman most of you know, Jim Baker, who became the colonel of the state police, later on the commissioner of corrections. He was an undercover drug agent out of the Shaftesbury barracks. Believe it or not, he had long hair. And he worked Pittsfield, North Adams, down in the Berkshires, down into Holyoke, Springfield area on drug-related offenses. What's really changed in many of our communities, and I highlight that in Bennington, there has always been guns and drugs involved. It's not new. What's new is the use of the guns, the use of the firearms, the number of murders, the number of cases where firearms have been used to intimidate people. That's really the genesis of this bill. And there's one thing that we did drop from the bill that I'll discuss early on, and that was a provision to ban sales of semi-automatic weapons to persons under 21. And part of the reason was we spent a lot of time in committee on the Braun decision of the United States Supreme Court. And we, actually the senator from Chittenden Central, decided to not go forward with that provision at this time, partly because there was no prohibition on youth possessing firearms back in the 1790s, which unfortunately is part of that Braun decision. So as we look at other firearm safety measures, we will have to consult with on the Braun decision, but we did hear from a lot of experts on the Braun decision, and firearm and constitutionality and such. That's no longer in the bill, but starting, going through the bill, which starts on page 730 of today's calendar. Section 1 concerns the so-called Big 12 offenses. The Big 12 offenses began in the 70s following the murders in Essex Junction. That was when then Governor Snelling called a special session of the legislature. They revised our juvenile laws. They created 12 offenses that we commonly referred to them as Big 12 offenses. There are things like arson causing death, assault and robbery with dangerous weapon, assault and robbery causing bodily injury, aggravated assault, murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, etc. Those are the most heinous crimes in Vermont, and so we refer to them generally as the Big 12. Your Committee on Judiciary began a review of those laws, and I must explain that generally an offense committed by a person 18 years of age or younger must begin as a juvenile in the family division. However, if the offense is one of the Big 12 offenses and the offender is at least 14, then it can begin in the criminal division. Big 12 list has been on the books without being amended for many years. And then during that time, new criminal offenses have been created and should have been added to the Big 12. And Section 1 adds several of those offenses to the Big 12, specifically aggravated murder, aggravated sexual assault of a child, carrying a firearm while committing a felony, drug trafficking, human trafficking, aggravated stalking, and an attempt to commit any of those offenses, and violations of conditional release imposed for a Big 12 offense or for any other offense that was transferred from family division to criminal division. This latter provision reflects the need to keep the offense and the conditions of release for the offense together at the same proceedings. Section 1 also addresses what has become known as the ping pong problem. We heard a lot from both the defense and the state attorneys about the ping pong, and what basically current law only permits a youthful offender proceeding for a non-Big 12 offense to begin by the court transferring the case to the family division from the criminal division. However, as I explained a moment ago, non-Big 12 offenses must originate in the family division. This means that even if a state's attorney and the defense counsel agree that youthful offender treatment is the best approach in a particular case, the state's attorney must still file a motion asking the court to transfer the case to the criminal division, and then follow that up with another motion asking the criminal division to transfer the case back to the family division for youthful offender treatment. This is obviously a waste of time and resources. So Section 1, which was developed between State's Attorney Marthage from Bennington and Marshal Paul, the Deputy Defender General, to eliminate the ping pong, would have the parties stipulate that a case should be converted from a juvenile proceeding to youthful offender proceeding without having to transfer back and forth between courts and different judges. The Department of State's attorneys, the Defender General, and the court have all agreed on this language. Sections 2 and 3 are related and concern the use of a dwelling for certain criminal offenses. The existing law in Section 2 prohibits a person from knowingly permitting their dwelling, building, or structure to be used for the purpose of illegally dispensing or selling regulated drugs. Section 2 amends this offense by prohibiting the owner from recklessly allowing illegal drug sales to occur in the owner's building. Recklessly is defined as the consciously disregarding a substantial and unjustifiable risk, which is the Vermont Supreme Court's interpretation of reckless, criminal recklessness. Section also reworks the exception available for landlords, which under existing law provided the offense was only applied to landlords who knew at the time of the lease was signed that the tenant intended to use the property for drug sales. A little background on this. We had several apartments in the Bennington area with a number of units. People in many of those units complained to the landlord about drug activity, making it more difficult for them to live their lives. And most of them, because of our housing crisis, weren't able to move. So they complained to the landlord, and in many of those cases, the landlord did absolutely nothing. And there was basically nothing they could do to prevent this. And so what we attempt to do here is if the landlord takes no action, such as contacting the police or starting eviction proceedings, that could be a reckless behavior, and it could lead to criminal charges being brought against the landlord. But again, the only landlord who would be affected are those who do absolutely nothing or actually encourage the drug or human trafficking. Section 3 simply enacts an identical provision prohibiting a person from knowingly or recklessly permitting their dwelling, building, or structure to be used for the purpose of human trafficking. The language is exactly the same as the language regarding illegal drug sales in Section 2. Sections 4 and 7 are based on federal law and create Vermont offenses based on existing federal offenses so that prosecutions can be brought in state court by Vermont state's attorneys instead of having to depend on the availability of U.S. attorneys to file charges in federal court. And I want to just pause for a second. And the administration did not want to take positions on any of the firearm pieces of this bill. So while they support the bulk of the bill, they're at least neutral at this point on the firearm sections. Section 4 prohibits defacing a firearm serial number, which is defined as knowingly removing, obliterating, or altering the serial number. Section 4 also provides that defacing a firearm serial number may be considered a violent act for the purposes of determining whether a person is eligible for bail. The court would still not be able to deny bail unless it found that the evidence of guilt was great and that no other conditions could prevent the threat of violence. The language would also have the effect of establishing the fact that the offense was a violent one. Section 5 prohibits straw purchases of firearms, which means buying a firearm for another person who is legally prohibited from having one, or who intends to use it to commit a crime, or who intends to transfer it to another person who fits those descriptions. Congress passed a straw purchase prohibition last year, and this makes Vermont consistent with the new federal statute, which was the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. There is an exception, so there's not a violation if the person purchased a firearm as a result of threats or coercion by another person. And we've actually seen this in the Bennington area where people have been threatened if they didn't go in and buy the firearm for someone that they would be killed. The section also contains language providing that defacing a firearm serial number, straw purchases may be considered a violent act for purposes of determining bail eligibility. Like 49 other states and the federal government, Vermont has a statute prohibiting the possession of firearms by persons convicted of certain crimes. Federal law also prohibits other classes of persons from possessing firearms. And Section 6 adds several of them to the Vermont prohibited persons list. That we are adding fugitives from justice, persons who are subject to final relief from abuse or stalking orders, and persons against whom charges are pending for drug trafficking, human trafficking, or carrying a dangerous weapon while committing a felony are also prohibited from possessing firearms under federal law, and Section 6 prohibits possession under Vermont law as well. Section 7 concerns the existing crime of carrying a dangerous or deadly weapon while committing a felony. Language is added providing that the offense too may be considered a violent act for the purposes of determining eligibility for bail, provided that the offense will not be considered violent if it's a felony rather than a misdemeanor solely because the monetary value of the property involved. This ensures that offenses for such crimes as larceny or passing bad checks will not be considered violent simply because they happen to involve more than $900 worth of property, which is the monetary threshold between misdemeanors and felony offenses for many crimes. Section 8 makes juvenile records available to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System for the purpose of conducting a background check when a person under 21 years of age purchases a firearm. This is required to make Vermont law consistent with the bipartisan Safer Communities Act of 2022, as I mentioned earlier. It is also contained in the Miscellaneous Judiciary Bill S33, which was recently approved by this body. The language remains in both bills to ensure that it passes this year. Sections 9 and 10 established the Community Violence Prevention Program to be administered by the Department of Health in consultation with the Department of Public Safety. the Director of Violence Prevention, and the Executive Director of Racial Equity. The program will work with communities that have seen an increase in violence to help address and implement strategies addressing the causes of youth and community violence. Municipalities and nonprofit organizations are permitted to apply for program grants for the purpose of funding. Section 10 provides an appropriation of $10 million from the general fund to support the grants. I'll report later from the Appropriations Committee, but there is $10 million for these grants in the governor's budget. Sections 11 and 12 propose an additional one-year extension on the implementation of the Raise the Age initiative that Vermont has been establishing for the past several years. Prior to this initiative, the young person who committed a non-Big 12 offense could only be charged as juvenile in family division if the youth committed the crime at age 17 or younger. Under the first step of the Raise the Age initiative, which went into effect in 2020, this age limit was raised so that anyone aged 18 or younger who committed a non-Big 12 offense would have their case start in the family division. Under the second step of Raise the Age, which is scheduled to go into effect on July 1 of this year, anyone aged 19 or younger who commits a non-Big 12 offense would have their cases begin in family division. The second step was originally scheduled to go into effect last year, but situations with the pandemic, etc., have forced us to delay it by another year. 19-year-olds being treated as juvenile. 19-year-olds who commit non-Big 12 offenses being treated as juveniles. Section 13 requires DCF to report to the Senate and House Judiciary Committees by September 1 of this year and December 1 with progress reports on the requirement that Raise the Age initiative be implemented in 2024. Section 14 requires the Vermont Sentencing Commission to report to Justice Oversight and Senate and House Judiciary Committees on whether the list of Big 12 offenses that is enlarged in Section 1 of the bill should be further enlarged to include additional offenses. Section 15 is a severability section which provides that if any section of this act is found invalid by a court, for example, by being found unconstitutional, that finding will not affect any other provisions of the act. And Section 16 provides that S4 would go into effect upon passage. Mr. President, that concludes the report of the Senate Committee on Judiciary. And I can read off a 2-page witness list, but I won't do that. But if there's any questions about witnesses, I'd be happy to provide you with them.
Senator from Bennington, you may remain standing to offer the report of the Committee on Appropriations if you wish.
Well, I just took that opportunity to sit down, Mr. President. The Appropriations Committee has made a...
Page 741.
On page 750 of today's calendar.
I believe it's 741, Senator.
Excuse me, I had the sheriff's report that I'm doing later. Yes. I can be very brief with this. They put in the striking Section 9 and new language regarding the public safety, but regarding the grants program, the community violence prevention program. And secondly, they struck out, the Appropriations Committee strikes $10 million and put in a new section that the grants awarded from state funds to the Community Violence Prevention Program established by 18 VSA Title 13 shall be dependent upon the amount of the appropriation. So that, Mr. President, is the report of the Committee on Appropriations, which the Committee on Judiciary would support somewhat reluctantly, because we were hoping to get to 10 million. So it would be the first bill that's gotten through without the Appropriations Committee taking the actual dollar amount out. So we understand that process. Thank you, Mr. President. We urge the body to support the Judiciary Committee amendment, which was a 6-0-1 vote, and the Senate Judiciary, the Appropriations Committee amendment was a 601. The Judiciary Committee was 410.
Question now is, shall the report of the Committee on Judiciary be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You've amended the Judiciary Committee report as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Judiciary as amended? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Judiciary as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to begin with my thanks to the senior senator from Bennington. All of us saw spikes in violence in our community over the last couple of years. Those have been most dramatic in our cities, Bennington, Burlington. I've seen things in Burlington that have shocked me in terms of where they happened and when they happened. But I will say I've never been more shocked than what we were given by way of testimony from the Bennington police, video of incidents occurring in real time in Bennington. Things involving the ready use of large weapons, taking over homes and forcing the people in the homes to operate a certain way for months on end. Really things that shock the conscience. And so I know of no senator who is more responsive to his community than the senator from Bennington. He did work on this early and often, and what you see now is the product of a long set of discussions that he's been conducting from the administration into the House and in our own chamber. So again, thanks to him for that. I just wanted to point out, and this speaks in some ways to the senator from Addison's comments earlier on the gun violence that we saw in Tennessee. I've begun to hear from constituents wondering what's the extent of what the Senate and the other body are planning to do on firearms this year. And I just want to clarify for people, S4 and S3 are what the Senate signed up to do this particular first half of this year. And by bringing this to the floor now, we complete that Senate work. You heard this morning H230 referred to judiciary from the other body. That contains a series of other substantial firearm safety measures. So taken together, it will represent very significant work in trying to keep our communities and our families safe from gun violence. So I do want people to know that while this is a substantial bill we're passing today, it is not the extent of what we planned for this particular year. So thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time?
Roll call.
Roll call has been requested by the senator from Bennington. Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, the secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
Yes.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Jewett.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingalls.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyon.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes.
Senator McCormack.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Pershwick.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
Yes.
Senator Bohosky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Williams,
No.
Senator Renner,
Yes.
Please list the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 28. Those voting nay, 2. And you've ordered third reading of S4. This now brings us to S17. S17 was read for the first time. It was referred to Committee on Government Operations, which is considered that when the bill is amended, it ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations that also reviewed the bill and recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S17, an act relating to sheriff reforms.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and for the report of the Committee on Government Operations, the Senator from Addison, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last year, the Addison County Sheriff was arrested on charges of sexual assault, unlawful restraint, and domestic assault. These charges were brought following months of investigation and after he'd publicly posted a video of himself calling into question his ability to effectively and safely serve as sheriff. After his arrest, the sheriff was released on conditions that prohibited him from engaging in law enforcement activities or carrying a firearm. Yet, he remained sheriff. After his release, I heard regularly from constituents, including leaders of several community organizations that serve women and vulnerable Vermonters, as well as officials in towns that contracted for services from the sheriff, who were concerned that Addison County was being put at risk by the sheriff remaining in office. The Addison County Legislative Delegation and the governor called up for the sheriff to resign for the good of the people of Addison County, but he refused and remained in office, earning full pay and overseeing the administration of the Addison County Sheriff Department until a new sheriff was elected and sworn in last month. At the same time, other counties, including Bennington, Orange, Caledonia, and Franklin, have also experienced significant issues with their sheriffs. In Bennington, the sheriff admitted to living in another state for much of the year while serving as a sheriff in Vermont. The Orange sheriff was found by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council to have engaged in improper conduct and oversight of a deputy. The Caledonia sheriff paid out over $400,000 in bonuses to himself and his staff. And the Franklin sheriff was seen on video kicking a handcuffed man in the groin and is now under investigation for financial misconduct as well. There have long been troubling financial oversight issues with sheriff departments, leading to the implementation of significant auditing requirements of a decade ago. Additionally, the transition period from outgoing to incoming sheriff has often been a time of questionable behavior that's led to staffing, financial, and service challenges. Recently, in Orange County, nearly the entire staff resigned after a new sheriff was elected. Communication within the sheriff department broke down, equipment was unaccounted for, and local services, including emergency dispatching services, went uncovered until picked up by other agencies. Meanwhile, important public safety services, including the provision of security services at state and county courthouses and assistance to victims of domestic violence, have gone undone in some counties, while sheriffs dedicate their time and staff to chasing more lucrative contracts for services less focused on public safety and public service. The problem with sheriffs is not a case of a few bad apples. It's a systemic problem that must be addressed with systemic solutions. Because of our lack of sophisticated county government in Vermont, sheriffs exist in a space with minimal structure, oversight, and funding, which has led some sheriffs to overly enterprising endeavors and an existence lacking sufficient oversight and accountability. This lack of accountability is made more complicated by the fact that sheriffs are elected officials who serve 4-year terms and state officials specifically named in the Vermont Constitution. This means that our ability to set requirements for individuals to hold the office of sheriff is limited, and our only means for removing them from office for misconduct is impeachment. Thus, this bill is part one of an effort at sheriff reforms, with more to come in the following years. It's important to note, Mr. President, that not all sheriffs have engaged in problematic behavior, and many are ethical, effective public servants and law enforcement officers. This includes the senator to my right, who is a member of the Senate Government Operations Committee and a former sheriff who served Franklin County as sheriff extremely well for 20 years. In addition, 2 current sheriffs from Lamoille and Windham counties have stepped up graciously during this time of turmoil for their profession. And while they didn't ultimately support S-17, they contributed significantly to the committee's conversation and many of the provisions in the bill. So with that, let's turn to the language of the bill, which can be found on page 742 of today's calendar. Section 1 adds 2 provisions to the Category B conduct list of gross professional misconduct overseen by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, namely gross negligence or willful misconduct in the performance of duties and abuse of powers granted through law enforcement officer certification, as a means to provide further oversight by the council for the types of violations committed by some sheriffs. Sections 2 and 3 make several changes to the audit requirements already provided for under current law, including tightening up the audit timeline after a sheriff decides not to seek re-election, laying out requirements for notifying the auditor if a sheriff establishes a non-public organization to supplement the efforts of the sheriff's department, and making clear that an audit may occur at times other than the transition to a new sheriff. These audit provisions were included in the bill at the recommendation of the state auditor following concerning audit findings and gaps in financial oversight at sheriff's departments. Section 4 outlines conflict of interest provisions to oversee sheriffs and a requirement that they disclose conflicts of interest to the sheriff's executive committee and recuse themselves from matters that present such a conflict. Section 5 creates guardrails for the use of a 5% administration fee that sheriffs are permitted to charge on the contracts they execute. Currently, they are permitted to use the funds generated through this fee to invest in equipment or services for their department, cover general department expenses, or increase compensation for themselves or others who work for their department. This flexibility is what resulted in the $400,000 in bonuses mentioned earlier. Sheriff compensation, Mr. President, is set in statute like other executive positions. In 2023, each sheriff's state salary is nearly $95,000, which many sheriffs supplement, some substantially, with a nearly blanket salary bonus flexibility that no other state employee is granted. Thus, S-17 eliminates this flexibility. Under the bill, sheriffs would be able to collect a 5% administrative fee, overhead fee, but could no longer use it for compensation supplements. Rather, this funding could be used for departmental expenses not covered by state or county funds, including the cost of vehicles, uniforms, equipment, training, and professional services, which mirrors a list suggested to us by the sheriffs themselves. You'll see an amendment to by the Appropriations Committee that would permit the use of these funds for salary supplements, but within certain parameters and for a limited time. Finally, this section includes a provision for a single statewide contract for security services at county and state courthouses. This provision was mutually agreed upon by the judiciary, and both the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the Chief Superior Judge endorsed this approach to ensure courthouse security. The bill includes contract amounts, but they will be removed by the appropriation amendment. Section 6 lays out some additional duties for sheriffs, including that they maintain a detailed record of their work schedule, comply with provisions of the standard operating procedures and policy manuals created by the departments of state's attorneys and sheriffs, and provide assistance without a fee to individuals who have a relief from abuse order and need to collect belongings from a residence. Section 7 requires a sheriff to provide at least one deputy to cover security at each courthouse within their county of jurisdiction. Section 8 amends outdated language to ensure compliance with recent changes in the use of force provisions under state law. And Section 10 repeals outdated language and a financial penalty for refusal to assist a sheriff. For those of you paying close attention, you'll notice that I skipped Section 9. That exclusion will be corrected in a GovOps amendment coming up. Section 11 creates a Sheriff's Department Oversight Task Force to examine issues in implementing reforms and accountability across Vermont's 14 sheriff departments. This 9-member panel is made up of law enforcement officers and directors, county officials, human resources and audit officials, and law enforcement reform organizations to make recommendations related to policies and practices, efficiency and equity in delivering services, compensation, duties, oversight, sustainable funding, and state-level organizational issues. The task force will report back to the relevant committees by November 15th of this year with findings and recommendations. In digging into the problems that prompted this bill, your Government Operations Committee, as I said, discovered that we are limited in what we can do now to provide better oversight of sheriffs in Vermont. This bill is a first step. We are confident that the task force will bring us recommendations to make systemic improvements to the operation of sheriff's departments for the good of Vermonters. Simultaneously, the committee is deliberating on a constitutional amendment that would create a further avenue for reforms in future years. We heard from a lot of witnesses, including many sheriffs, the Auditor's Office, the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, the Vermont Judiciary, including the Chief Superior Judge, several members of the public, of course, our Legislative Council, the Secretary of State's Office, the County Judges Association, the Department of Public Safety, Director of Crime Victim Services, the Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, one of our high bailiffs in the state, a former state senator herself, and the League of Cities and Towns. Mr. President, your Government Operations Committee voted 5-1-0 in favor of the bill, and we ask the Senate for its full support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Now for the report on the Committee of Government Operations, the Senator from Bennington, Senator Sears.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a pleasure to work with Senator Madison on this bill. From the beginning, she and I had a number of conversations with Legislative Council, and the first amendment to the bill is something that has to do with a single statewide contract for a rate of pay for sheriff to provide security in courthouses. Currently, there's 14 different contracts with 14 different sheriffs for security. Both Senator from Madison and I wanted that in the bill, but we were advised by Legislative Council that it might be deemed unconstitutional. So the good work of the Senator from Madison and hearing both from the sheriffs and the Supreme Court that they would like one single statewide contract, we ended up with that. But the First Amendment, as we do so often in appropriations, takes the money out, which was at $51 per hour, and it'll be part of the effort as we deal with the big bill as soon as the House passes. But I can assure you that what the Senate has always been in favor of trying to get as much money as possible to provide security to our courts, and I don't think it'll be any different this year. The Second Amendment has to do with the use of the overhead funds for the years, calendar years 23 and 24. This is compromise, and it provides for 50% of the 5% could be used for annual compensation for a sheriff, provided the sheriff has been in office at least 2 years, and to any employee of a sheriff's department or sheriff that has been in office less than 2 years, and not more than 10% of annual compensation for the employee. And it also directs that funds devised from the administrative contract. Overhead fees shall not be used for any other bonus or supplemental employment payments. And our third amendment from the Senate Appropriations Committee has to do with the Oversight Committee, and we make several changes there. But that was after hearing from various groups. As I said, this is a result of compromise in the committee, and the vote in appropriations was 6-0-1. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the report of the Committee on Government Operations be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Government Operations as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. I believe there is a further amendment to the Government Operations report to be offered. The senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment can be found on page 751. As I previewed in my bill report, part of what this amendment does is just renumbers because a number was skipped in the bill, so it now will have 9 and 10 and 11. And then there was a section of the bill that needed to be removed because it was a section that when we were considering a reorganization of the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, we were drafting that, and when we took it out of the bill at their request, we missed one section, so that would be corrected. And then we added a tiny bit of language to the report at the end, asking the committee to also look at the appropriate employment status of courthouse security deputies. You may recall that last year we created state deputies for transporting prisoners, and this was just asking the committee to look at whether that would be appropriate for the courthouse security deputies as well. So that is the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the Government Operations report as amended be further amended as offered by the senator from Addison and others as found on page 751 and 752 of today's Senate calendar? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have further amended the report of the Committee on Government Operations as offered by the senator from Addison and others. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I might ask the reporter a question or two.
The senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
First, Mr. President, I want to thank the committee for taking up this issue. It's long overdue, and I think this work is excellent. There are a couple of questions I have, mostly, I think, little bits of confusion produced by what's not listed here. So the first is on 743. I'm just wondering about the definition for willful misconduct. What would constitute that and activate the process? At the top of
at the top, thank you. That is an excellent question. I believe it is defined at another part in the statute, and I can get that for you for third reading, or we can take a recess.
No, that's fine. Third reading,
okay.
My second question is page 745, Mr. President. And this is subsection B at the top. A sheriff or deputy sheriff shall avoid any conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest. And it goes on to say, except as otherwise provided in subsections C of this section, when confronted with a conflict of interest or an appearance of a conflict of interest, a sheriff or deputy sheriff shall disclose to the Sheriff's Executive Committee. So what I'm wondering there is, it omits who would be the confronting party. And so I'm wondering what constitutes that confrontation. Can any citizen do that, or is this section a reference to actions by the Sheriff's Executive Committee alone?
That is an excellent question, Mr. President. This provision was included because one of the sheriffs created a nonprofit organization that was sort of a shadow organization of the sheriff's department, and it created a direct conflict of interest. And so in that case, the auditor brought up the conflict of interest, and we didn't actually talk about whether an individual citizen could initiate this. It was more of an official other organization or another sheriff or the state department of state's attorneys and sheriffs. So again, if that needs to be clarified, I'm happy to work on something for third reading because we didn't contemplate an individual citizen doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate the senator's answer. I do think that should be clarified because it's followed by a shall. This confrontation creates the legal obligation that the sheriff shall disclose, so it would be important to know who can initiate that confrontation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The question is, let me double check with the secretary. The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
I wonder if I might inquire of the reporter of the bill.
Senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you. That previous question is definitely relevant because I have, as an elected official, I've been accused of having a conflict of interest for owning land, having dogs, owning chickens, and serving on other boards. So I definitely think that would be great to articulate for third reading. My question has to do with on page 747 of the calendar, the subsection B or item B. It says a sheriff shall maintain a detailed record of the sheriff's work schedule, including work days, leave taken, and any remote work performed outside the sheriff's district for a period of more than 3 days. My question is would that inaction to do so for whatever reason in a role like this, I can imagine things to get away from them, especially during times of stress, would that qualify as willful misconduct should they fail to have that detailed record? And who would be validating, who would be checking those records, monitoring them, and overseeing them?
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. I am not sure if it would count as willful misconduct. And again, I'll get that definition for third reading and we can determine that. This provision was brought about because of the sheriff in Bennington, as I mentioned in my report, was leaving the state for extended periods of time while getting paid to be a sheriff in Vermont. And he was unable to produce a record of the time at work in Vermont versus his time in Tennessee, I believe it was. And he was asked repeatedly by members of the press for this information, as well as members of the Bennington community, and was unable to provide that information. So I think that is sort of the situation where somebody might be able to provide might be asked to turn over that information if they seem to be neglecting their duties, and I guess that would be a negligence of duties, then a sheriff may be requested to provide that information to show that they were performing their duties and that they were in their district at the time of the time in question.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as up? Senator from Franklin.
Mr. President, may I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
Senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you. Just following along with the question regarding the detailed record, is there any other office in which we require a detailed record of a work schedule, including work days and so on? Do we do that with any other office?
Yes, Mr. President. Many state employees have to provide their schedule and their work time taken, their leave taken, and they do so through the employee management system for the state of Vermont. And this would include people up and down the sort of hierarchy of state government.
Well, I'm referring to elected officers at the county level or higher. Do we require that of members of this body, for example, who are elected officers to detail where they are on certain days?
We require that we are present for votes, and we are accountable for being here for taking votes. And While we don't have we are not given days off or leave taken at this point, and so our work schedule is our time here in the
Well, how
State
about
House.
other offices? For example, the Auditor of Accounts, the Secretary of State, the Assistant Judges of the Superior Court. Do we require them to maintain a detailed work schedule?
I don't know.
Including work days?
I don't believe that there is a statutory requirements for such, but I can't speak to what each individual office requires of themselves or their employees.
Well, thank you very much. I just raised that issue because this seems to be unduly punitive regarding a specific office, regarding a specific problem that happened with a specific office holder in the past. And what that office holder did, allegedly, is very well known to the voters to whom that officer is responsible to. I just wonder on the notion of requiring an elected official to keep a timesheet is necessarily the best policy when what we want to have is we want to have people who can do the job, do it well, do it efficiently, but not micromanage them. And this strikes me as micromanagement. I also have another question for the reporter, if I might.
Senator from Madison is interrogated as
the number $95,000. Can you enlighten us as to where that's coming from?
That's the statutory salary. I think it's $94,600. I did round up, Mr. President. It's in the state budget.
Okay. In terms of that particular salary, with the reduction of the elimination of the 5%, which, as I understand it, historically was added by the General Assembly, quite some time ago, in lieu of giving a salary raise to the sheriffs at that time. Will the sheriffs get a salary pay cut as a result of that elimination, based on what they're earning now?
The statutory salary provided to sheriffs will remain the same. We did not make a change to that. What may change for some sheriffs is their ability to give themselves unfettered bonuses. Those are not salary, those are bonuses. And that is currently at the discretion of a sheriff. Not all sheriffs do use the 5% for bonuses, but many of them do and substantially increase their salaries.
So it does affect compensation currently for many of the sheriffs. Is that a fair statement?
It affects their bonuses and the bonuses that they themselves decide that they are entitled to.
Are the bonuses part of the total compensation?
Their bonuses are part of the compensation they provide themselves.
And the question is, did the committee have any discussion as to whether the statutory salary without the bonus fairly reflects the value of the job compared to other similar jobs in state government, such as state police leaders?
We did, Mr. President. We discussed it and we added it as a thing for the oversight task force to take a look at. I will note that there are a variety of experience levels for sheriffs, and so some of them have almost no experience, and some of them have, years, decades of experience. And so that is something that we did discuss. And as compared to the state police are compensated based on their experience level and their training level and their performance level. So there's a much more rigid and sort of documented level of salary increases for state police, whereas sheriffs are at their own discretion how much they are paid.
Is there an average compensation level when considering the base salary and bonuses that currently is being paid to sheriffs? Is there an average?
I don't know what the average is, Mr. President. As I said, some sheriffs pay themselves a substantial amount above and beyond their base salary, and some do not pay themselves anything above and beyond. And some use the 5% to provide bonuses to their staff. So I can see if I can find that information by third reading, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Before I call on the senator from Windsor, I'd like to remind the senators that when performing an interrogation is through the president, so it would be a conversation through the podium up here. Senator from Windsor.
Thank you. I rise with 2 points. The first is, I think this is one of the critical issues that the task force will be taking up, is the compensation, sustainable compensation, and also transparent compensation for this office. It's number 3 in the task force duties, which you can all look at on page 748. But I'd like to return to the conflict of interest question. We last year all passed, it was either last year or the year before, out of our committee, the Senate Government Operations Committee, the state code of ethics. Long overdue. Speaking of things that are long overdue. Any individual in this state can directly complain and lodge a complaint with the Ethics Commission on the behavior of any individual in state government. And they will be sent to the appropriate jurisdictions, but at the moment, individuals certainly are capable of complaining about conflict of interest, which is one of the biggest challenges we face, as we discussed this last year in the Code of Ethics. Thank you.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to refer back to the amendment made by the Appropriations Committee that does address the issue around compensation. We did look at how the salaries, because they're set for other offices, including commissioners, secretaries, and there is a provision that those salaries can be in as much as 50% above that stated statutory limit. And we wanted to be very respectful of the sheriffs that have been in office and served very well, that in fact they could end up with a significant reduction in compensation. On the other hand, we knew that this whole issue needed to be examined, and that was part of the study committee. So that is why we, in appropriations, added the amendment that allowed that 50% add-on, which is consistent with other positions in state government, and do it for the 2-year period of time so that there is an opportunity to look at compensation in a broader context. So I just want to clarify the thinking behind the amendment that was offered by Appropriations and has been voted on by this body. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Are you ready for that question?
Roll call, please.
Roll call has been requested by the Senator from Madison. Are you ready for the question? If so, the Secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
No with explanation.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Calderon.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingle.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyon.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes.
Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Pershling.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
Yes.
Senator Bihovsky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
Yes.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 23. Those voting nay, 7. And so the yeas have it. You've ordered third reading of S17 for explanation of vote. Senator from Chittenden, Southeast.
Sorry to use our time on this. This is an important issue. I just want to say I am glad this bill is happening and I want it to move forward. And I want to vote yes at third reading. My concerns are having to do with the vagaries of the conflict of interest. So I look forward to an amendment on that to just clarify who can file those things. I was asked to be in the other room. I didn't quite hear all of the floor discussion follow up from another senator. And as well as the timing, the schedule and the detailed schedule is just too unclear to me whether or not that will be willful misconduct. So I hope to be able to vote yes at final reading, but with the information I have now, I voted no.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to remind you that for an explanation of vote, also if you could write that down for the record, that is required for the journal. So please try to summarize what you just said for the record. Yes, third reading has been ordered of S17. Therefore, we are moving on to S18 in the calendar. S18 was read for the first time and is referred to the Committee on Health and Welfare, which reports that when amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Finance, which considered the same and recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S18, an act relating to banning flavored tobacco products and e-liquids.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and for the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare, the Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Gulick.
Mr. President, Bill S18 proposes to ban the retail sale of flavored cigarettes, e-cigarettes, and e-liquids. Banning flavored tobacco products is critical because flavored tobacco makes it easier to become addicted to nicotine, and drug addiction is an urgent public health matter. Flavors facilitate addiction by masking the harsh taste of tobacco, and menthol in particular soothes the throat and allows for a larger inhale. Tobacco companies have been extremely effective in getting folks on the addiction track by adding benzoic acid to the nicotine molecule to make it more able to pass through the blood-brain barrier and use higher concentrations of nicotine. Over the years, companies have steadily increased the concentration of nicotine in their products from about 1% to 6% and higher. These products are more potently addictive and a very cheap source of nicotine. For example, today, a teenager can buy the nicotine equivalent of several cartons of cigarettes, roughly the equivalent of 40 packs or 800 cigarettes for about $20. As a high school teacher, I saw the devastating effects of flavored tobaccos and vaping. Vaping or e-cigarette smoking in Vermont high schools and middle schools is reaching a crisis level. School administrators and teachers are spending time tracking down students who are missing hours of valuable class time to feed their addiction, while districts are having to spend money setting up vape sensors as well as adding programming. And we know that our schools are so stretched right now that couldn't come at a worse time. The vaping products on the market today are a testimony to the ability of tobacco companies to make their products alluring to children and young adults. Flavors such as candy banana, waffle cone, vanilla custard, and dragon juice are some of the favorites. Kids find using tobacco products to be a pleasant experience and only later realize they become addicted to the product and struggle to focus, become anxious, and need to skip class to vape. We know that 80% of youth, 12 to 17, start smoking using flavored cigarettes, and that kids as young as 7 are using. Tobacco companies also target the BIPOC and the LGBTQ communities. Dr. Philip Gardner at the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council testified that 80% of African American adults and 94% of Black youth who smoke use menthol products. These striking statistics arise from the predatory marketing practices used in the Black community, where there are more advertisements, more lucrative promotions, and most disturbing, menthol cigarettes are cheaper in Black neighborhoods.
Over the past 50 years, these practices have led to people of color dying disproportionately from heart attacks, lung cancer, strokes, and other tobacco-related illnesses. We learned that the harmful and sometimes deadly effects of nicotine come from several key events that occur in the body, and these events are enhanced by menthol. Dr. Brendan Henderson testified that it's been demonstrated that dopamine neuron excitability is enhanced by menthol plus nicotine when compared to nicotine alone. Dopamine neurons are critical for addiction-related behavior, and menthol increases the ability of nicotine to alter neurons that are key for encoding dependence to nicotine. There's a cost to all of this, and I know that my colleague from finance will be speaking to this, but according to Dr. Gogo at UVM's Larner College of Medicine, Vermonters spend $404 million annually on healthcare costs directly caused by smoking. The average Vermont household has an annual tax burden of $1,037 from state and federal smoking-related expenditures. This bill is estimated to result in a revenue loss of $4.12 million in fiscal 2024, split between the general fund and the education fund. And in 2025, it will amount to about $5.62 million. The long-term public health benefits of reducing tobacco are undeniable, and there would be significant long-term fiscal benefits to reducing healthcare costs from this legislation. Surveys of adults and analysis from municipalities that have banned flavored tobacco and flavored tobacco substitutes indicate that between 30 and 65% of users would quit altogether. Surveys of youth tobacco users have indicated quit rates of 60 to 75%. In comparing flavors in tobacco to those in alcohol or cannabis, it's important to note that there are marked variations in how each substance is treated and controlled. Alcohol is labeled with percentage of alcohol made clear for consumers to see. There are blood alcohol limits for operating a motor vehicle. There's a cannabis control board that is responsible for administering the adult use and medical cannabis programs in the state of Vermont. Nicotine quantities are often a mystery to the consumer and with little to no indication on labels, not to mention the ingredients inside. The ban in Massachusetts has been successful, and following the law, unadjusted sales of menthol, non-flavored, and overall cigarettes trended upward in border states. However, these increases were not significantly, statistically significant or different from sales patterns in non-border states, and they tend to drop off pretty quickly after the ban. In November 2019, Massachusetts became the first state to restrict the sale of all flavored tobacco products, including menthol. In 2020, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island enacted bans on the sale of flavored e-cigarettes, and California became the second state to prohibit the sale of both flavored e-cigarettes and menthol cigarettes. And New York just announced it would ban both flavors and menthol. If passed, this act shall take effect on September 1st, 2023. The Senate Committee on Health and Welfare heard the testimony of 24 witnesses, including legislative counsel. And I will read some of those for you. I don't know if I'll read the whole list, but we did hear from the Commissioner Mark Levine, Vermont Department of Health, Tina Zook, Government Relations Director for the American Heart Association, Sarah Cosgrove, Tobacco Cessation Specialist, L.E. Farrisee, Pediatric Pulmonologist from the Vermont Medical Society, Prospero Gogo, who's an Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Vermont, Dr. Nevin Zablotsky, who's a healthcare educator, Justine Franco, who's a school nurse in the Rutland City School District. I think I am going to read them all, actually. Andrea Valenti, Deputy Director and Associate Professor, Rutgers Center for Tobacco Studies and Rutgers School of Public Health. Dr. Philip Gardner, Co-Chair, African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Del Monte Jefferson, Executive Director, Center for Black Health and Equity. Brandon Henderson, who's an associate professor, Department of Biomedical Sciences at Marshall University. Richie R2, who's a former menthol smoker, Windham County. Jay Nichols, who is the executive director of the Vermont Principals Association. Matthew Meunier, who's a student at Champlain Valley Union High School, as well as Ryan Kent, who's also a graduate of CVU. Amanda Klinger, partner at King and Spalding LLC. Aaron Segrist, president of the Vermont Retail and Grocers Association. John Clark, owner of Alpine Mart and Stowe. BJ Mayer, Northeast Wholesale Association. And Lindsay Stroud, director, Consumer Center Taxpayers Protection Alliance. And the vote in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee was 3-0. We, the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare, ask for the support of the Senate. That is my report. Thank you, Mr. President.
I've heard the report from the Committee on Health and Welfare. Now for the report on the Committee on Finance, Senator from Chittenden Southeast, Senator Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will fill in the colleague from Chittenden Central spoke to most of the finances. A couple of other things I'd add is in testimony we did hear that the cost of tobacco-related illnesses to Vermont is increased from $348 million to $404 million. So it's going up, and $93 million in direct Medicaid expenditures. I think this is a useful statistic as well, that the cost of lost productivity related to tobacco usage in Vermont is estimated to be $576.2 million. Productivity losses are from smoking caused premature death and illness, preventing people from working. That's from Tina Zuck at American Heart Association. I also wanted to articulate further that the estimates for the cost to the state of Vermont for fiscal year 2024 was estimated to be $4.12 million, with $3.51 million lost to the general fund and $610,000 loss to the ed fund. Most of this revenue loss of the bill from this bill will result from the banning of menthol cigarettes based on the estimates that were offered, and those estimates are also from the statements just previously made by my colleague from Chittenden Central has to do with assumptions about when this is banned, if people will stop smoking or if they won't or will purchase other non-menthol or non-flavored tobacco products. We did add an amendment, the report I believe I'm speaking to, the report from Senate Finance was really inspired, I would say this, some compelling testimony. It had to do with to me personally, I won't speak for the whole committee, but compelling testimony was Massachusetts data showing smoking rates after they banned flavored tobaccos was perceivably dropping. And that was an indication that it should have a stronger effect to reduce youth smoking as well as smoking in general. What was unclear in some of the testimony was that Vermont raised the age to purchase cigarettes in the fall of 2020, and the Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey is done every 2 years, the last time in 2019 prior to 2020, and then the 2021 one did not happen because of the pandemic. So your Senate Finance Committee was not particularly clear how this can be measured, but what we did gravitate around is what you will see on page 763 of today's calendar, a short additional amendment that is effectively asking that on or before March 1st, 2027, the Department of Health shall provide to the House Committee on Human Services and the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare the results of the 2025 Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey that relate to youth use of tobacco products, tobacco substitutes, and e-liquids, along with a comparison of the rates from previous Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Surveys. Just so that future legislatures definitely take the time to look at consumption rates of flavored tobacco as well as tobacco at large and seeing if this prohibition might have some effect on it. Your Senate Finance Committee heard from Casey Harrington, the owner of Beverage Baron, Erica Young, Vice President of Motor Fuels and Store Operations at the Sandry Companies, George Burns, the owner of Capital Candy Company, Jennifer Carby, Director and Chief Counsel of the Office of Legislative Counsel, John A. Clark, owner of the Alpine Mart in Stowe, Ted Barnett, Fiscal Analyst, Joint Fiscal Office, Thomas Bryant, Executive Director of National Association of Tobacco Outlets, Tina Zuck, Government Relations and Regional Lead, American Heart Association, and I forget how he pronounces it, Yal, my apologies, Yal Osowowski, Deputy Director, Consumer Choice Center. Your committee vote was 7-0-0, and we urge the Senate to concur.
Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Health and Welfare did talk about the need for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey to be reported to us, given to us. So this is a friendly amendment from Senate Finance as far as Senate Health and Welfare is concerned. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question now is, shall the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare be amended as offered by the Committee on Finance? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe I am correct jurisdictionally in asking the reporter of the finance report a question. May I interrogate him?
The Senator from Chittenden is the reporter of the other.
I'm curious, I think I know the answer, but just for clarity's sake, what state agency or department is responsible for enforcing should this ban go into effect?
Mr. President, I thank the Senator for the great question because that is absolutely relevant. My understandings from conversations outside of committee is that it would be from the Department of Lottery and Liquor. They are currently the agency that regulates smoking sales as well as liquor sales throughout the state, as well as lottery sales. I also understand that the Attorney General's office would play a role in additional enforcement should any misbehavior be observed or accused.
So, Mr. President, I'm just curious if they indicated any additional resources might be needed for this additional enforcement.
Mr. President, another excellent question. I do not recall testimony before Senate Finance regarding any additional revenue costs or for this budgetary year for the enforcement of this ban. In hallway conversations since committee testimony, it was indicated from those that have been around a lot longer than I, Mr. President, that this would fall squarely within existing jurisdictional and enforcement activities of the Department of Lottery and Liquor. So the answer was that there was no additional questions opposed to the administration as to the additional costs of enforcing this ban.
I thank the Senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Essex.
Mr. President, I'm not an advocate of tobacco use. I believe that it's harmful to one's body and health, but nonetheless, it's legal, and the taxes, the sale of tobaccos to the state coffers is large. I'm also not a fan of legal marijuana. The harm that tobacco creates on society can be said for what marijuana can do for one's health. But nonetheless, it's legal, and the state is anxious to see what tax revenues the sale of legal marijuana will provide to the state coffers, to the coffers. But what do the sale of both tobacco and marijuana have? They both flavor their products to make them taste better so that people can enjoy them more. This weekend I visited a marijuana store for the same titles of what the senator from Chittenden had reported about the flavors of tobacco can be said for the same in the marijuana dispensaries. I was just amazed on all the flavors that they had. I wanted to take a picture of them, but they wouldn't allow me to do that. But I couldn't even see the old traditional marijuana. It was all flavored product. And I'm pretty sure it's to make sure that people would want to buy that product and enjoy them more. This weekend I met with some classmates to plan a 40th class reunion. I really had a hard time really understanding. It's been 40 years, but nonetheless we were there, and we got talking about some of the shenanigans that we had when we were in school, and through discussion we all kind of said that we didn't really even like the taste of beer, Mr. President, but we liked Boone's Farm, especially Tickled Pink, and we drank it by the gallons. But we're not talking about banning alcohol neither, or flavored alcohol neither. We're talking about banning just one product of probably 3 products that are very harmful to everybody. And I just think that maybe we ought to talk about banning all the flavored products that we have out there to help our population's health be better. I'm also hearing from just tons of convenience stores that offer the flavored tobaccos and what the impact's going to have. not only on the state's coffers, as the other senator from Chittenden has said about the $4.1 million, but also the viability of these stores that don't make any large profits selling just one product, but they have to depend on selling all the products on small margins so that they can survive. Several of the stores are larger stores, and they talk about having stores in Massachusetts as well. And I think we spoke in caucus today about when Massachusetts went and banned the use of flavored tobaccos, how the sistering states' sales went up on those products. And some of the larger stores that I'm talking about have seen the same experiences, and they're really kind of anxious that that's what's going to have when we ban this product, that we're not going to impact the health of anything, and that the sales of these products actually will probably go down in the state of Vermont, but will actually go higher in the neighboring states. One of them has said that the use of tobacco sales, because it's cheaper in New Hampshire, the amount of tobacco that they sell in New Hampshire is just staggering compared to the state of Vermont. So the thought of these migration sales going to New Hampshire isn't a theory, it's in fact a fact. But I'm, again, not in favor of this, of tobacco at all, but it is a legal product. As is marijuana and as is alcohol. And I just think that we're going to be harmful to some of these companies within the state that are doing business in here and sending a lot of tax dollars to the state's coffers. And I wish that we would talk about banning other products as well if we are really being serious about helping the health of all of our Vermonters. Thank you, Mr. President.
I believe the question still is, Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Someone asked me this morning, what did you do over the weekend? And I hate to tell you, but I spent the better part of the weekend reading about tobacco and reading about statistics and reading about bans and reading about prohibitions. And I finished all that reading just as troubled as I was when I started, because I see a lot of conflicting numbers that really concern me. I'm a former smoker. I started as a teen and I quit after 5 years, and I'm glad I did. I actually read the 1964 Surgeon General's report. I also read a lot of the material that was sent to me, particularly by agencies or organizations like the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Association, Dr. Polo from the University of Vermont, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, I'm sure I didn't, who wrote very powerfully about the effect of flavored tobaccos and tobacco generally on youth. It was very, very significant. At the same time, I started looking at the numbers, and I'm troubled that we don't have the last numbers about what's happening in Vermont. They're scheduled to be published in late March, and it's, of course, late March, and we don't have them. I'm not sure what they're going to show, but I looked at the numbers from a lot of other states. I looked at Massachusetts that had a lot of, not just the statewide ban, but the ban before the statewide ban on individual towns, and from town to town, you could compare from town to town, was there any real difference in sales? I also looked at the Vermont study and other studies as to where young people say they're getting flavored tobacco from when they're unable to purchase it. And what we're seeing, of course, is that they're purchasing it from other people. They're purchasing it still on the internet, despite the prohibition. They're purchasing it from friends and neighbors who go to other states to buy it. The net effect that perhaps New York will do a crackdown or Rhode Island will do a crackdown may be different than what exists right now. So when we look at Massachusetts, the thing that struck me the most about Massachusetts is before and after the ban on cigarette sales in neighboring states, we found that the tax revenues from June to September of 19 to June to September of 20 changed materially. In Massachusetts, it went down by 24%. In New York, it went up by 5%. In Vermont, it went up by 11%. In Maine, it went up by about 3%. In New Hampshire, it went up by 34%. In Connecticut, it went up by 3%. In New Hampshire, it went up by 25%. That 34% troubles me, because if we say that we're going to solve the problem about banning tobacco, or banning flavored tobacco, or banning flavored vaping, if all we do is move that someplace else, and we don't solve the problem, it seems to me the only way that you're going to solve the problem through bans. We remember our history of bans. Remember Prohibition? What happened there? And that isn't the only case where we banned something and it's just simply moved. And the economic impact and the health impact hasn't materially changed. We're seeing, at least in what I saw about numbers so far, we've seen relatively small changes downward in consumption of these kinds of products where they've been banned, but not material, not huge changes, but we have seen huge changes in increases as to where the sales are taking place outside. I think the second thing that concerns me is there's a difference between youth behavior and adult behavior. Adults, when they are of age, have the right to do dumb things. And they do. And purchasing tobacco is one of them. And it's not just youth that are buying these products. That concerns me as well. My biggest concern overall, as I look at this avalanche of numbers, many of which are conflicting, many of which are incomplete, is do we have a solution that simply isn't going to work? And that perhaps the better solution, and again, is being worked on, the FDA is got some proposed rules, who knows how long they will come about, that do ban these products on a national basis, and that a national ban might in fact make more sense than what we're doing here. So I'm very, very conflicted at what I see and the concern about ending the right of people to do dumb things, which they, as Americans, have the right to do, as opposed to creating a ban that may not be effective in doing what we're targeting and what we're trying to do and what we really want to do, and that's to stop youth from doing dumb things as well. So that's my conflict, Mr. President. Thank you.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gosh, the thought of banning dumb things. I'd rather spend our money. You know, we're the keepers of the public purse, and I don't sit on appropriations, but I feel this very strongly. And I would rather spend my money on childcare. I would rather spend our money on housing. I would rather spend my money, our money, the state's money, on so many other things, but to spend it on cancers and all the losses because of smoking and vaping strike me as anything we can do to change behaviors at an early age is really important. Spending money, hundreds of millions of dollars on fixing problems is really, I really wish we would not act. I mean, and that is in many ways supporting dumb choices that people make, to refer to the senators. You know, at what point does an individual have the right to impact the state coffers that completely? It's really frustrating that we have that sort of cycle that we do have. But I think I rise today because I've spoken to a number of my 8th grade friends, and many of them are here in the State House serving us as pages. And I continue to be alarmed at the age at which young people are being introduced to this insidious product. And when I hear about 7th and 8th graders being already addicted to nicotine, already it's so cool to do these different flavors, anything we can do to put a check into that behavior is something we should be doing. We can only do what we can do, and this is something we can do. And I know we have to work really hard affecting the sales they buy from their older siblings or wherever they buy, but the more we can do, and this is one of the things we can do, I urge us to pass S18.
Senator from Bennington.
Yeah, Mr. President, could you restate the question before us?
The current question before us is, shall the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare be amended as offered by the Committee on Finance?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare be amended as offered by the Committee on Finance? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare as offered by the Committee on Finance. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple of technical questions for the reporter of the bill, if I might.
The senator from Chittenden Central is interrogated as a reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, it wasn't clear to me if flavored cigars such as rum-soaked crooks would no longer be available. That's the first thing I ever smoked in my life, believe it or not. It got me very sick, but I'd never forgotten rum-soaked crooks. And, Mr. President, with flavored pipe tobacco, which my father used to smoke, which we all thought smelled pretty good. That's how we knew my father was around. So I wonder if those two are included. I heard the reporter speak of cigarettes and e-cigarettes. I didn't hear about cigars and pipes. So that's just a question, Mr. President.
Mr. President, all flavored tobacco products will be banned.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended? Senator from Orleans.
Yes, may I interrogate the report of the bill, please?
The senator from Chittenden Central is interrogated as a reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, usually when you do a bill, you look over all aspects of what you're changing and why you're changing it, and try to come back with reasonable answers. And my question is, and I believe I'm right on this, I think we outlawed or banned people from being able to purchase tobacco several years ago at an age of, I think, 21. And I'm wondering if that is correct or not correct.
That is my understanding, Mr. President.
So, I mean, we've talked about as low as 7th and 8th graders smoking flavored tobacco. Who is supposed to enforce the law that teenagers or even younger are not supposed to have tobacco? So who's supposed to enforce that? And did you have any enforcement people in to get any kind of a record of how many underage people have been arrested for obtaining, carrying, and smoking flavored or non-flavored cigarettes?
We did not take testimony from law enforcement to that regard.
And so, thank you, member. So, Mr. President, my question is, we passed these laws to ban young people from being able to buy these products. So legally, only people of age, 21 and older, are supposed to be able to buy it and then possess it and use it. So why hasn't law enforcement been brought in and asked, what are you doing to protect our laws that we have in Vermont? But yet the committee that reviewed this had no law enforcement in. And yeah, I would think if we enforced the laws that are already on the books, it would cut down the use of it. And yeah, I don't mind going to New Hampshire or Mass or New York, but I hate to see our tax dollars going to New Hampshire. And you know, you drive down through New Hampshire and they have liquor stores right on the interstate. I mean, you just hop off and or if you're on your way home, you can swing in right off the 93 and buy all kinds of booze at much less cost than it is here. Well, I'll bet you 10 to 1 they'll be selling cigarettes in these booze stores. The other issue that I haven't been able to figure out on this, well, I know the answer to it, so I probably shouldn't ask the question, but this, I mean, we heard a figure of 4.1 million or 4-point-odd million in losses. I think that number is ridiculously low compared to what Massachusetts their loss was in revenue. But next year, the other committee across the hall from finance that dealt with this, gonna have to find at a minimum, which I think probably maybe half or not even, maybe half, 200% off. We're gonna have to come up with a whole bunch of new money to plug the hole that this money is gonna, the loss of this revenue is gonna create. And I just think it's bad that a bill that's gonna cost us, the taxpayers of Vermont, millions of dollars didn't get a look at in appropriations. But we'll certainly get a look at it next year when the money doesn't show up. Thank you.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to note that while the Committee on Health and Welfare didn't hear directly from law enforcement, we did hear from people who are trying to enforce the rules about smoking, especially teen and youth smoking. And that is, we heard from school administrators who are trying to enforce it in our schools and are having a very difficult time, including having to close bathrooms, which creates other problems in our schools and access to bathrooms for a number of students, including days away from school because of illnesses related to it, including disruption of classes and disruption of extracurricular activities due to vaping and tobacco use. So we heard from school administrators who are trying to enforce the rules in school about smoking. Now, of course, the students aren't buying the tobacco products in school, but they are using them in school, and that is creating a disruption in our academic settings. We also heard from a man who owns a store that sells tobacco products, and he talked to us about his point of sale system that actually requires that somebody present their ID and have it scanned through the point of sale system before a purchase can be made. So this point of sale system prevents a cashier from selling tobacco to somebody who doesn't have the proper ID in the point of sale system. And also separately, I actually was in contact with the Department of Liquor and Lottery and asked them on behalf of a constituent about their work in enforcing the sale of tobacco products to people under 21. Because my constituent had the idea that this wasn't being enforced either. And in fact, the Department of Liquor and Lottery presented me with 5 years of data of the fines that they have given to either retailers or employees at retail outlets for selling tobacco to minors. The first offense is a $100 fine. The second and further is up to a $500 fine. And based on the data that I was provided, they are enforcing this and requiring that establishments that sell tobacco do not sell it to youth. There's also an extensive training program that anybody who is working in an outlet that sells tobacco products has to go through before they're able to be at the cash register. I don't have the data off the top of my head, but I'm happy to dig it out for the senator who asked this question. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question now is, shall the bill be amended? Senator from Chittenden Central.
A few quick points regarding students starting to vape in middle school, 7th and 8th grade. I just did want to point out that my colleague, the chair of Senator Housing and Economic Development, heard testimony that students in 3rd grade are starting to vape. So the age continues to go down in terms of starting to use these products. I think that's an important point. Just to reiterate, it is the Department of Liquor and Lottery that is the enforcer in this case, not the police. And this bill doesn't change any of the underlying law enforcement or enforcement issues. It just focuses on the flavors that cause the addiction. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended. The question now is, shall S18 be read a 3rd time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you've ordered 3rd reading of S18. I'd now like to recognize the Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Ruth.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. That was extremely exact as to our hard stop. We had a minute to spare. I thank the body. Very good discussion this morning. Pending announcement, I would move that the Senate stand in adjournment until 1 p.m. Wednesday, March 29th.
Now, the Senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate pending announcements adjourn until 1 p.m. Wednesday, March 29th. Are there any announcements? Senator from Addison.
Recess. Is that the correct motion? We meet at 1 o'clock this afternoon.
Going to
The point of information by the Senator from Windsor, it is a good question, but we are not going to officially meet, but we will be gathering in this chamber prior to 1 o'clock by a couple minutes in order to go to the judiciary retention hearing. Are there announcements? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. The members of Senate Natural Resources and Energy, please meet immediately after the floor in the committee room. We paused prior to voting a bill and need to complete that today.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm optimistic that joint assembly will be finished by 3:30. If so, I would ask Appropriations Committee to meet between 3:30 and 4:30. Thank you.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I gather I'm more optimistic. Senate Finance will meet at 3:15 or 10 minutes after the end of the joint assembly.
Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Senate Health and Welfare will not be meeting today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Education will meet 10 minutes after the joint assembly.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Government Operations will also meet after the joint assembly. Go with 12 minutes after.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate institutions will not meet today.
Are there any further announcements? Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Democratic Caucus will meet as quickly as possible at 12:15. We have two big things to discuss, dispatching legislative compensation. So I encourage you to bring your lunch down. We're going to have to end at about 10 of 1 to make it back up here in time. So please join us in the lounge at 12:15 sharp. Thanks.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the Senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until 1 p.m. March 29th. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. The Senate will stand adjourned until March 29th at 1 p.m.